A minimal composition often means minimal post-processing. Hi everyone, my name is Scott Davenport and welcome back to In Post. This is a series where I take an image and walk you through the post-processing choices that I made on it. Usually an image that's accompanied by an In the Field episode, which gives you the behind-the-scenes look at what choices I made during the photo shoot, camera settings, thought process, and things like that. So today I have a shot of a tree outside of Lake Henshaw, a very minimal composition, simple subject, and so that's going to translate into some very simple and straightforward processing. So let's just dive right in over to Lightroom and get started. Here's the image straight out of the camera. And let's start with basic things. We got lens corrections and we have our exposure and temperature and so forth. So lens corrections, just the standard, turn on the profiles, get rid of a little bit of the bowing. And in the basic panel, I played around with white balance. I wanted this area to be the white part, these reflections off of the water there. So use the eyedropper here, pick that, and then set a point there. And then played around with exposure, brought the exposure up quite a bit. You could see this is where it was. It was a little underexposed. So brought that up, added some contrast. And at this point, I kind of already knew I'm going to go in a black and white direction. There's not a lot of color here. The sky is already washed out. There's not much green on the tree that's visible, and pretty much everything else is muted and monochrome. So that's kind of where my head was when I went through the rest of this. So I brought the white point up, standard approach for this, holding on the Option key, and then clicking and dragging until I see where the whites get blown out, and then backing off a little bit. Same for the blacks. Opened up the shadows a lot. So the shadows were still very, very dark. And the foreground is what this image is all about. The tree is what's interesting. The background gives it some context. And highlights, brought those down as well. You can see this is what it was before, this was after, taking some edge off of the background sky. Now the hills behind this tree are still very hot, and I'm going to deal with that toward the end with some brushes. And the last thing in the basic panel was clarity. And so here's before, and then here's after. And that's predominantly adding a little crispness to the grass in the foreground, and some of the different things on the edges of the tree branches as well. So let's go to the next snapshot. Then we went to black and white. So this I just shifted over to black and white, and let me open up that pane. I started with the auto button. I actually have that set as preferences so that I always get an auto mix, because out of the chute, if I double click on this, it's actually, this image is pretty close, but it's a little too dark in the tree, so undoing that. The auto mix helped out with that. And here I usually just grab different points with this black and white mix and say, I'd like these hills, let's say for example, I want these hills to be darker, so I'll click and I'll drag down. Now you can see that's also pulling down the sky, so there's a limited amount that you can do with this technique because you're affecting the image as a whole. But that can get you a good starting point. In the tree here, I could bring the tree brightness up, so I'm clicking and dragging upward, opening the shadows up a little bit. And you can see on the panel over here, as I do that, undo, I'll do it one more time here, you can see that the aqua channel is changing, and a little bit of the greens, because that's the underlying color that's in that area. So I just fiddled around with these sliders until I got something I was happy with, and then moved on to detail. So let me bring that in, detail. And detail, reasonably subtle. The sharpening was raised and the detail raised a little bit, but the masking is way, way up. So I'm going to hit the Option key and click on the masking button. You can see the black areas, there is no additional detail being added. And the edges of gray and the fringes of the grass and of course around the tree, that's where all of the additional details being added. And that's exactly what I want. I don't want anything in the sky to get sharp, and there's really nothing there to get sharp. It's about the grass, it's about the tree, and a little bit of hints in some of the patterns in the water. And finally is the brushes. So the foreground, I still wanted this to stand out a little more, and I mentioned the sections behind the hills. So I used some brushes to take care of that. So let me open up the brush panel, and we can see here's first brush. I'll click on that, and we can see here this is all just painted through the grass. And what I've done is open the shadows up, so brighten things a bit, and added a bit of sharpness. So this is going to stand out to our eyes. And then the second brush, can see, is primarily going through, and it's a lazy brush stroke, through these areas that are a bit brighter behind the tree. And so when I click on that one, you can see I brought the shadows down there some. So these portions that I'm overlaying on the tree with the brush stroke, those are already very dark, and so deepening the shadows doesn't really matter for that. It's already almost pure black. But also boosted up some clarity, and that helped further, further add the contrast and bring things, tone things back a little bit. And that is the entire processing. So everything was done here just in Lightroom. This was, again, out of the camera, straightforward, and this is the final shot. So during the shoot, I was paying quite a bit of attention to color in the sky. But as I got into the processing, I decided I wanted to go black and white with this one. I did have some earlier shots, if you saw the In the Field episode on this, earlier before the sun came up, where the sky was a much deeper blue, and that was a nice rich color, but the foreground was completely silhouetted, and I liked some of the textures in the grass in this one. So decided to go black and white with one of the images that was taken a little closer to sunrise itself. Now, why no on-one processing and no black and white tool for this one? For this image, the silhouette was nice, and what I really like the on-one stuff for is dynamic contrast and being able to really punch up textures and details. And I just didn't think I needed that for this image, and what I got out of Lightroom was enough to suit my needs. So the tip of the week is, I guess, process your image with your main subject in mind. Now that should always be part of what you're doing, whether you're shooting, whether you're processing, is what do I want my viewer to look at? And so for this particular case, I want the focus to be the tree and the foreground. And so there's not any crispness in the background. The hills remain soft, and you saw how I did some darkening of certain areas to downplay bright areas that were in the background to make sure that tree is really what's going to capture your attention. That's it for this week in post. Thanks very much for watching, and if you enjoyed it, give me a little social uplift. Send it out to your Twitter feeds, Google+, Facebook, wherever you're seeing this video, or wherever you spend your time in the various social networks of the world. That would be great. I'd also like to hear your questions. The questions that come in, there's really the fuel for a lot of these shows. And when I'm able to answer a question for you, I have to think about what it is that makes or breaks a certain type of technique, and that helps with my photography. Hopefully my answers help you with your photography, and at the end of all this, we get to become better photographers together. So until next time, my name is Scott Davenport. Thanks for watching.